Thank you so much. It's a huge honor to participate in this extremely important event and with these distinguished panelists on one of the most important topics related to rule of law. The issue of gender equality and women's freedom is integral to rule of law questions in a way that I think there's an obvious dimension to that, and then there's some more subtle dimensions. The obvious dimension is that women make up half of the human population, and so if women's freedom is denied, if women don't have the right to property, the right to vote, the right to run for office, the right to be equals in judicial systems, in every other way related to the rule of law, then humanity isn't free. And that basic point sometimes is lost. I think when we talk about the development of rule of law from Magna Carta to the present, I think we'll hear more of this in the panel, it wasn't exactly a straight line from Magna Carta to women's equality. And that's something I think that we should reflect on a little bit in this setting. It's also, though, the case that there are some more subtle dimensions involved in the relationship between gender equality and rule of law. I happen to be a political scientist by training, and it's interesting, as more and more studies are done relating women's equality to other outcomes that we care about, the relationships are extremely positive and very robust. So, for example, the extent to which women participate in parliaments is very positively connected, not only with democratic stability, but also with economic development. In effect, the more women are free, the better things are in a variety of other areas. And I think it's not surprising, given those correlations, which are becoming increasingly clear in the scholarly community, that the enemies of freedom, the enemies of the rule of law, invariably attack women's rights first. It seems to be somehow subtly clear to them, too, that if women are free, other kinds of freedoms will follow. We see extreme versions of that, which we'll hear more about too, such as ISIS, which has targeted women's rights and freedom and women physically in a way that is shocking in its brutality, and which Baroness Nicholson's organization has done so much to combat. But we see that also around the world in authoritarian regimes, which either gradually or more overtly roll back women's rights as they're trying to exert their autocratic rule over the population that they try to conquer. So we should never lose sight of gender equality when we discuss rule of law, for all the reasons just stated. And the panel we have today, which also I hope will take the form of a discussion as we finish our presentations, is one of the most distinguished panels we could possibly have on such a topic. Let me quickly read you the biographies, short bios, of the participants. Our main presenter today is Baroness Nicholson of Winterbourne. She is the chair of the AMAR International Charitable Foundation, a charity of which His Royal Highness the Prince of Wales is patron, we should mention, and which through the long-term provision of public health and education provides refugee and internally displaced populations under continuing stress in Iraq, Lebanon, and the wider region with vital support. Baroness Nicholson of Winterbourne was ennobled and took her seat as a member of the House of Lords in the United Kingdom in 1997, where she chairs the All-Party Parliamentary Group for Foreign Affairs. She was appointed as Prime Minister's trade envoy to Iraq by the Right Honourable David Cameron in January 2014. She served as a member of the House of Commons from 1987 to 1997 and of the European Parliament from 1999 to 2009. And she is a member of the United Kingdom delegation to the Parliamentary Assembly of the Council of Europe. In response to her presentation, we're going to have two discussants, again very eminent. We have first Linda Klein. Linda Klein, who is, I gather, the president-elect of the American Bar Association coming in, is a lawyer and managing shareholder of Baker Donaldson's Georgia offices. Her law practice includes most types of business dispute resolution, usually in construction, higher education, and pharmaceutical industries. This includes contract law, employment law, and professional liability. In June of 1997, she became the first woman to serve as president of the State Bar of Georgia, one of the largest state bar associations in the United States. She has served the American Bar Association as many capacities and is currently its president-elect nominee. She has a deep interest in international law and is the president of several nonprofit organizations as well. And finally, we have Cassandra Q. Butts, who is the U.S. Ambassador Designate to the Bahamas and currently serves as a senior advisor to the CEO at the U.S. government's Millennium Challenge Corporation, MCC, an international development assistance agency with which I'm sure you're all familiar. As senior advisor, she advises the CEO on a range of strategic and policy-related issues, chairs the MCC Investment Management Committee, the agency's senior-most body in managing a grant portfolio of over $8 billion, and leads the agency's work to prioritize gender equality. Ms. Butts was formerly the deputy counsel to President Obama, where she focused on domestic issues and judicial nominations, including a vetting process that led to the nomination of 2 Supreme Court justices. She was the general counsel to the Obama-Biden Transition Project and served as director of then-Senator Obama's Senate transition team. So I think you can get a sense for the caliber and insight that we're going to be treated to in just a moment. So let me please welcome to the stage Baroness Emma Nicholson, and please join me in giving her a warm welcome.
Good morning, colleagues, ladies and gentlemen. I start by offering my very profound thanks to the Presidential Precinct. We're being given a wonderful opportunity altogether to focus on hugely important matters that affect our world today. I particularly want to thank Jim Murray, whose brilliant vision of the need today to reinforce the impulse of the common good is the thread that has brought us together, and to enshrine in all societies the fundamentals which ensure that the common good embraces our way of dealing with each other. We look for global guidance, of course, in the great UN conventions, these vital documents signed and mostly ratified by each nation's leaders and their governments are frequently not honoured and most likely never referred to below the levels of the lawmakers and the judiciaries. The lives of ordinary people need much, much more. And it's clear that women do, particularly, given the unbearable suffering that millions, no billions of our fellow women endure on a daily basis. May I suggest that the post-Second World War system is not protecting them, nor, given the weak level of salary equalization internationally, is the world seemingly keen to give women the professional and the economic status that would allow women to become fully equal without any more lobbying. I personally believe that real freedom is economic freedom. We need much, much more action for and by women to gain globally assured equality, and the thoughtful, high-powered yet profoundly practical leadership that the Presidential Precinct pioneers will result, and I have no doubts in this at all, in closing the magic circle of the aspirations that we all have, of the grand ideas that we debate so eloquently, and bring at last the final achievement of the fundamental freedoms for all and sundry. What are those fundamental freedoms? We know them well: the freedom to move, the freedom to worship, the freedom to speak, the freedom to trade, the freedom to have our own intellectual property, the freedom to cross borders, the freedom to be ourselves, the freedom to have our own identity and to be respected whoever and whatever we are and wherever we come from. Now, how does the Magna Carta give us the trigger for freedom of women, since it was drafted, written, and signed by the all-powerful of 13th century England, who were naturally all men? Now, we women are certainly identified in the Great Charter, but by default. Sadly, not as individuals in our own right, because we had no legal status at that time at all. We had no identity. But on our acceptable positions as wives, as mothers, and most importantly as guardians of our late husband's honour and sometimes property. And in those positions we were identified, and those rights accruing to us by virtue of our fathers, our brothers, and our husbands were codified in the context of widowhood, motherhood, and wifedom. But not for all women, just for a few, the noble women. I, fortunate as I am, would be protected by the Charter. No other woman in my village of Winterbourne would have been protected, save my sisters, by accident of birth. Yet, from this highly unprepossessing start, the rights of every woman and every girl throughout the United Kingdom and beyond have become protected in law, implemented by most judiciaries and by the police in many societies, and most importantly of all, accepted and honoured by global people internationally. Now the argument is why rights are not being fulfilled. It is not an argument that those rights should be enshrined. This curious document, the Magna Carta, began, I suggest, much of that. Why could that happen in Britain, which has had powerful women, as most societies have throughout the ages? How could those women flourish without identity? How is it that the Magna Carta triggered something that made women's rights come out? I suggest that there was a very inherent belief in British society that women were equal to men. Indeed, the very first woman, historically speaking, known to everyone, Queen Boadicea, she led from the front and died because of it. But as Julius Caesar noted disapprovingly, women in Britain had the same rights as men in law at the time of the Roman invasion. He didn't waste much time in getting rid of it, but nonetheless he wrote to his wife or his mother, I can't remember which, in his diaries, saying this is a grey and rainy island, don't come here. And they're quite crazy, these people. They treat their women the same as men in law. So I think underneath it all, we still had that belief. Two big invasions completely put paid to that, the Roman, followed by the Norman invasion. And that left women without their status, save rather quirkily in the city of London. If you look up Chaucer's Canterbury Tales, think for a moment, why did the young men chase city widows? Because they were wealthy. Why were they wealthy? Because they could inherit. They were the only people in the whole of England who could inherit. So penniless young men chased elderly, rich city widows. It shows their status. They had it. They were very fortunate from the beginning. They kept their status. And it's interesting in the Magna Carta that the rights of the City of London are protected, but they're much older than that. And the Magna Carta and its sister document, the Charter of the Forest, reopened the doors of women's freedom to trade. The Charter of the Forest. Almost behind one of the sentences, you find women's right to pick up wood in the forests without being decapitated. All right, that's not much of a right, but that's exactly the same right as the foresters were being given. King John didn't want it to happen, you see, and he clamped down on it, but women in there as well as men, which is rather good. So we're allowed to trade, we're allowed to work. That's absolutely fantastic. One of the key freedoms, freedom to marry without being forced to do so. Very important when the king had guardianship. Women then, as you know, they were the property of their husbands, their fathers, and their brothers. Indeed, you can tell when you read your Jane Austen, that was exactly the same. When you read your Shakespeare, when you read The Winter's Tale, the whole weak spot is that the women didn't have any rights at all. They were all begging all the time to get protection, to be allowed to do what they wanted to do. So the Magna Carta gave quite a lot of rights. It even gave the right to women to speak in law, admittedly only when their husbands were killed, not when anyone else was killed, but even that was a tiny fragment of a right. And we women were very, very, very good, as you know, at weaving something very large indeed out of something very, very modest. We've had to do that because of this situation. However, I will say that a huge amount of time had to pass before true women's rights came into the United Kingdom as a whole. 1707, the Union of the Parliaments of Scotland and England brought some of the Scottish rights to England and vice versa. The clans allowed women to inherit, some of them, not very many. And 700 years or more later, my grandmother campaigned for the right to vote. We found a lovely photograph of her, beautifully dressed in black with a veil, with gloves, a slender young lady. Standing beside her, a huge London policeman, 3 times her girth, twice her height, looking rather disapprovingly down on her as she stands there holding a banner saying, "Votes for women." It took a long, long time. But power at last came through. In my 4 years of work with Mrs. Thatcher when she was Prime Minister, we concentrated. She gave me the job as a voluntary vice chairman of the party. She gave me the job of focusing on the rights of women. She knew how crucial it was to have an equal society. Today, women all over the world theoretically have these rights. As I have said, the UN conventions enshrine them all, signed and ratified, incorporated in different legislations, different constitutions everywhere. But they don't have those rights. These conventions are too far away. Corrupted legislation, corrupted judiciaries. The law is only as good as he who writes the law, she who implements it, and those who judge it, and the police. The law is not perfect just because it is the law. So these societies where women don't have their rights, and indeed in the United Kingdom, we have a huge, probably the most multicultural city in the globe in London, 150 different nationalities, and that's at a rather low count. So we have the task of ensuring that all these common values are brought in and that we all work together for the common good. I'm grateful to the Presidential Precinct. Earlier last year, we had a wonderful conference in the AMAR Foundation in the Presidential Precinct, and with the universities too, formed the Presidential Precinct, and we were focusing particularly on the tragic plight of the Yazidi women, who may very well, as the law may yet be able to prove, be victims of real, true, copper-bottom-plated genocide. I suggest that we have it all today. There's a huge number of us women who've got those rights. We implement those rights. We welcome and we cherish those rights. The other side of the fence, there are even more women than us who don't have those rights. They didn't have any opportunity to have them. Indeed, they have much, much less than those rights. They are the victims of today. I suggest that the magic circle is there in the room today. We have all the capacity, every single scrap of it, ladies and gentlemen, to change that situation globally. We represent almost everywhere. We represent many different societies, many different places. We're all together as a team. Here we are in the Presidential Precinct. I think we should go for it, work together to close that magic circle and bring the rights of women to every single one. Thank you.
Fabulous. Thank you so much. The research is overwhelming. A critical element of effective development is guaranteeing gender equity and empowering women. We certainly heard the history of it. 10 days ago was International Women's Day. And at International Women's Day, United Nations Secretary Ban Ki-moon said, "To be truly transformative, the post-2015 development agenda must prioritize gender equality and women's empowerment. The world will never realize 100% of its goals if 50% of its people cannot realize their full potential." We heard Steve say that earlier. It's been 20 years since the Beijing Summit on Women, where the world affirmed that women's rights are human rights. And we've been turning the rhetoric into reality. There's more to do. Empowering women through law and the legal profession has long been a priority of the American Bar Association. Our Commission on Women in the Profession has been an effective advocate for women lawyers, shining a light on disparate treatment of women in the profession, honoring leading women lawyers, providing invaluable educational and mentoring resources for the next generation of women lawyers. Equal opportunities for women in the legal profession promises more effective representation of women and of women's issues in our legislatures, boardrooms, and in our courtrooms. So similarly, the American Bar Association, the ABA, and its Global Rule of Law Initiative, ROLI, we call it ROLI, work to advance women's rights and women's access to justice as a foundation of the rule of law and good governance in countries around the world. While there are many ABA programs in addition to ROLI, time is only going to permit me to cover a very few ROLI programs. But information about all the American Bar Association programs can be found on our website, americanbar.org. So I'm going to mention 3 of ROLI's proven strategies. First, promoting women in the profession. Just as we find here in the United States, empowering women begins with empowering women lawyers. But in many countries, the legal profession is not viewed as appropriate for women. So ABA ROLI prioritizes training and mentoring programs for young women lawyers and support for women's bar associations. Examples are a scholarship program to send women to law school in the Democratic Republic of Congo, a network of women lawyers supporting other women lawyers in Libya to help them advocate for protecting women's rights and equal opportunity during that country's transition. A second strategy, it's enhancing access to justice for women. The feminization of poverty, indigenous customs restricting women's roles in society, and lack of awareness about rights are among the factors that impede women's access to legal remedies. We're working to bring down those barriers with women's legal aid clinics and traveling lawyer programs that bring free legal assistance to women where they are, where they need assistance in rural villages and marketplaces, in their homes. An example is women's rural legal clinics that we've developed in Guinea with traveling paralegals that visit remote villages to raise awareness of women's rights and the availability of free legal assistance to help women realize those rights. Third strategy, combating sexual and gender-based violence. Nothing reflects disempowerment of women more tangibly than the prevalence of gender-based violence. And therefore, this too is an ABA priority both here in the United States and around the world. And this work comprises public education, raising awareness, legislative reform, and legal aid and accountability efforts. Examples include supporting the advocates for a new law that would define domestic violence for the first time in China, or working with prosecutors and judges to bring accountability for sexual violence in the Democratic Republic of Congo, where since 2008, ABA ROLI has provided free legal services to more than 18,000 survivors and helped file more than 10,000 cases. There's much work that remains to be done. This is challenging, painstaking work, often done one woman, one family, one village at a time. It involves law, it requires changing laws, and to be sure, there's just so much more as well to do. Educating the public, especially women, building a cadre of women lawyers, and giving all women access to legal remedies. These are proven strategies, and they're critical, not just to realizing the rights of women, but about the importance of the rule of law for everyone. The time for action, as the Baroness has told us, is now. Thank you very much.
Good morning. I want to thank the Presidential Precinct for the invitation and the other organizers. I will keep my comments brief, talk a little about the work that we do at the Millennium Challenge Corporation and how it impacts the issue of gender equality. But I do want to recognize the Baroness's comments in such a compelling argument of how gender equality can be found in the origins of the Magna Carta. And I think about our own U.S. Constitution and its founding origins in the Magna Carta. And our own U.S. Constitution has been a work in progress, as we're aware. Equal rights were not enshrined in our Constitution, and we have been able to evolve and amend and find both gender rights and the right to vote for women, but also for minorities as we have evolved. I was fortunate enough actually to participate in the 50th anniversary of Selma the march from Selma to Montgomery a couple of weeks ago. And as our president, President Obama, is fond of saying, that not only are we a work in progress, but we are constantly perfecting our union. So I'm happy to participate today and talk about those issues, but particularly the issue of gender equality. As was indicated, I am at the Millennium Challenge Corporation now, and MCC is unique among international development assistance agencies in that we like to say that we lead with our values. And what do I mean by that? That as we select our partner countries to engage, we do that selection based on policy performance. And we are looking for policy performance in three categories. We're looking at ruling justly, economic freedom, and investing in people. And in the category of ruling justly, it certainly finds its origins in the Magna Carta. We are looking at issues related to civil liberties. We're looking at issues related to the rule of law. We're looking at issues related to political participation, government effectiveness, control of corruption, and freedom of information. And we're looking at those issues because we believe that if a country shows policy performance in those categories, that they are a good place where we can use U.S. taxpayer dollars to promote development and fight poverty. So those are the categories that we look at. But as important is we focus on, in terms of policy performance, is we give attention to gender equality. And at every stage of our work, every stage of our partnership with a country, we are looking at gender equality. And it is at the forefront of our work. When we select a partner country, we are doing so with a view at how that partner country is providing equal access for women and men to participate in the public and private sector. And what I mean by that is, are there appropriate laws in place so that women and men can be equal participants in the workforce? Are there laws in place so that women and men can equally own land? And those are areas that we think are important as we're selecting a partner country to determine their commitment to gender equality. At other stages of our work, from the design and development of our investments to the assessment and implementation of our work, to the focus on results, and also in our final evaluation of our compacts, we are looking at integrating gender and the importance of gender equality. MCC has a very focused mission. We are focused on reducing poverty through economic growth. So it's not only clear to us that gender equality is an important value, but it's also clear to us that gender inequality presents a constraint to economic growth, and that in preventing men and women from being productive members of their country workforce will impede development and the reduction in poverty. So that's why we believe that gender equality is so important. And let me give you a couple of examples of our work. I noticed in looking at the program that there are at least 3 representatives from our partner countries here, Zambia, Malawi, and Nepal. And we have done very good work in those countries. Actually, in Nepal, we're just beginning the work, but I have every confidence that it's going to be quite good. So 3 examples where we have focused on gender equality. In Lesotho, before we began our engagement in Lesotho, we wanted to ensure that married men and married women had equal access to being able to participate in the public and private sector. And in order to accomplish that, we worked with the government of Lesotho to pass the Equal Capacity of Married Persons Act, which in fact gives men and women equal access to participate in their societies. In the Ivory Coast, most recently, the Ivory Coast, in order to qualify for participation as a partner country with MCC, actually changed its family code to provide greater rights to women. In Jordan, we're actually working with women to make them certified plumbers. And you ask, why certified plumbers in Jordan? We are working on water in Jordan. As many of you know, Jordan is a water-poor country. And women have incredibly important roles to play in managing water resources. So we're helping women in their homes, in the homes of other women and other homes of other families, actually to become certified plumbers. We're helping them to become entrepreneurs, to start their own businesses, and to provide microfinancing. In Georgia, we're actually investing in women to become STEM graduates. One of the issues that we identified in determining our work in Jordan was that the absence of STEM professionals, science, technology, engineering, and math professionals, was actually impeding economic growth in Georgia. And what we also identified is that although women score better in international science tests and also in workforce surveys, they weren't going to STEM professions because of gender norms that prevented them from getting engaged in STEM professions. So we're actually encouraging, through our funding, women's involvement in the STEM professions. So those are just a few examples of our work, and we believe that by focusing on gender equality at MCC, that we're giving voice to both women and men to increase their incomes and become important participants in furthering their economy and reducing poverty. And we're also holding governments accountable, that they will maintain the laws in place so that women can be full participants in furthering their growth and also reducing poverty. Thank you.
Thank you so much. This is on? Is that working? Yeah. Thank you so much both to the wonderful for the Baroness for her wonderful presentation and to our two discussants. I wish we had 2 hours, actually, because it's so rich. We have instead about 8 minutes, and so what I'd like to do is take a question now, and then I hear there's a question from the web. We want to make sure we get that one in as well. So who'd like to go first? If not, the web may go first. Doug, do you have the question from the web? It's in front of me. That's why. It says question from the web, which I thought was a signal there would be one. But it is the question from the web. I will read it. Despite concerted efforts by Kenya and other sub-Saharan African countries to embrace gender equality in their constitution, many women are still reluctant to participate in elective politics. What can we do to encourage their participation and to conform to the dictates of the constitution in Kenya?
What can we do to get
women in Kenya to really participate in, to embrace gender equality in the Constitution? Many women are reluctant to engage in elective politics. So how can we inspire them?
I've spent a lot of time on that with Mrs. Thatcher, as you can guess. When I took over the vice chairmanship, which she asked me to take on as vice chairman of the Conservative Party with special responsibility for women, there were 650 potential candidates for Parliament, of which 8 were women. And so I met all 8, and they begged to be got off the list. They said they hadn't wanted to go on at all. They'd only agreed for their names to go on, so that the list didn't look completely unacceptable. So we began from the beginning. And the question was how to persuade my fellow women exactly to take this question seriously. Right. I think the key is to recognize that women are monstrously busy, busier than men, if I could say so, very often. Because most women, many women, have children, have husbands, have families. On top of that, they probably have parents, uncles, aunts, everything else. And when things go wrong, most often, it's the woman who has to go and do something. So women are very, very busy, in a sense, by accident of being the ones who give birth, the ones who, therefore, spend more time looking after people. 80% of all health services globally, to prove my point, are taken up by women. 80%, not by the women themselves, but by the people who are looking after. So that's not, if you like it, a sexist comment, it's a practical comment. Therefore, in order to tempt other women to spend time, precious time, on politics, you have to persuade other women, which is not difficult if you're a politician, that it really matters, that it's something that really will have an impact. Because women are so busy, the last thing women want to do is spend time that is wasted. There may be something more important to do down the road that you've got to do. So I spent a lot of time successfully, I have to say, in explaining to other women why if you don't give maybe 5 minutes a month to politics, never complain when you don't get the legislation you want. Never, ever grumble if something comes out of Parliament or even the local council that is contraindicative to your view of life or your region or your village or something. If you want change, you have to do something about it. In that sense, you have to follow the men. And so I spent a huge amount of time. I targeted a particular age group. I chose 35 to 50-year-olds because these are really serious professional women. As you were talking about professional women, that's when women have to make that mark in that age group. And they may also have other responsibilities, or they may not. So if you can persuade women of that age group, just to give a little bit of time, then you have to make absolutely sure you have to find proper tasks for them to do. It's not any good just asking women to come to a meeting and sit and listen or make the tea or do the collection or something. They want to have proper jobs. So I spent a lot of time on this, and it worked. The 35 to 50-year-old female vote for the party I was working for, Mrs. Thatcher's party, the Conservative Party, rose for almost the first time in history in the next election as women got involved and other votes of ladies dropped. So it's a question of persuading other women with real examples of why it matters. And of course it matters, because if you don't get involved, someone else will get involved. They won't have your ideas. They may have awful ideas. They may have better ideas, of course, but that's up to you to improve your ideas. And if you want change, if you want society to be different, you've got to get involved. Politics is the way.
You know, we have so little time. What I'd like to do is take one question and then turn it over to you, and we can both comment on that question and the other one, just to make sure we get an audience member in. Yes? Was there a... Yes, right here.
I actually have a question, a comment, and then a question for Baroness Nicholson. Thank you first for your very inspiring, historic depiction of women's rights. I found that really resonant, and thank you. I wonder if you'd be willing to talk briefly about your work for the present and the future with AMAR International, and just say a few more words about that.
The AMAR International, we have our critical person from Washington sitting here, another critical person from Washington sitting there, and we are basically a volunteering outfit, and we look for professionals in critical situations, because we believe that when people are in real trouble, you must get in beside them and do everything you possibly can to provide health, education, and rights. One of our proudest achievements in recent years, for example, has been teaching in prisons in Iraq. Now, that's not an easy thing to do. We've been teaching the Ministry of Justice, we've been teaching the rule of law in prisons, to prisoners, to prison warders, to the prison governors, to the Ministry of Justice, to the police nationally, who have become our best friends in consequence, and on top of that, to 19 other ministries. We've been teaching the rule of law, and the rule of law and human rights. We've been focusing, especially in those prisons, on women prisoners, whose plight is pretty dismal. And this has had a most amazing impact. It brought people together. We've also been doing exactly the same teaching in the local universities and in the prisoners' families. Because the whole point about prisoners is, mercifully, most come out, but then you have to make sure that everybody can handle the situation. So we've stopped a lot of crime. But better than that, we've actually inculcated a huge range of people with knowledge of human rights and of the rule of law. Mm-hmm. It's been a fantastic experience. That's the AMAR Foundation.
Thank you, Baroness Nicholson. Why don't we have comments from our two discussants, and then we have to wrap it up.
I just related to the question, the web question of how do you get women more involved in the electoral process. You know, one of the things that we found in our partner countries is consistent with what the Baroness said. You actually have to go to them. You know, you have to meet them where they are. And you can't expect that they're necessarily going to come to you, because obviously they are quite busy. Something else that we found that is significant and doesn't get the kind of attention that it deserves is that sometimes that there are fees in place that to register as a candidate that are perceived as gender neutral and innocuous, but because women are spending their income on their families, or more inclined to spend income on families, that they don't have the resources to to provide for registration fees. And so if you can eliminate registration fees and other types of barriers, you can get women more engaged. And also if you put women in positions where they actually have their own income, where they have money coming in, they get voice and they become greater participants, not only in what's going on in their family and in their communities, but also in the electoral process. So you just got to look at the barriers that are in place that may be perceived as gender neutral, but in fact have a more significant negative impact on women than they do on men and their ability to participate.
Thank you, Cassandra. Linda.
I can't add anything to those very wonderful comments that the Baroness and Cassandra have made. There was one thing that I was hoping we'd have time to talk about, and we didn't, and that was when we do all of these programs that are so important in bringing gender equity, there need to be mechanisms to measuring their effectiveness. And since we don't have time to talk about them, I did send everybody to americanbar.org. There's a lot of information there about measurement tools to measure the effectiveness of all of these programs. So I'll end it there.
Thank you, Linda. Let me just say in closing, it's clear that we need not just a day for this. We need this to be an ongoing conversation. One of the things that Jim Murray pointed out this morning is the presidential precinct is an ongoing virtual platform as well as a physical site. So let's keep this conversation about gender equality and women's issues and rule of law continuing after this so that people didn't have a chance can connect virtually as well as in the room today. So please join me in thanking once again our absolutely outstanding panel.